Hello, listeners. You're about to hear my interview with subversive, transgressive filmmaker Charles Pinion, who directed the 3 shot on video classics Twisted Issues, Red Spirit Lake, and We Await. This is a 2-hour interview, but you'll only be getting the first part for free. If you are not on my Patreon, only the first part of this episode will be available on the main feed. If you would like to hear the rest of the interview, you got to sign up for my Patreon, which is patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. It's well worth it. I've got bonus episodes, screenings, video essays, commentary. Just sign up, and it's my main source of income. So you'll be supporting a very hardworking woman in sleaze. Thanks for listening, and remember to sign up for my Patreon if you want the whole episode.
You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Well, hello again, listeners. This is Annie Rose Malamed, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. And I have a very special episode today. I'm interviewing incredible transgressive filmmaker Charles Pinion, who directed Twisted Issues, Red Spirit Lake, and We Await, which are films that we've been talking about over on my Patreon. We actually watched Red Spirit Lake with Charles's blessing recently, and it was an incredible screening. Just to plug my Patreon, if you're listening to this and you're not part of it, patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo, and you'll get incredible screenings like the Red Spirit Lake screening. So Charles, you've described yourself as, to me through text, as kind of a footnote in the cinema of transgression, which I feel is very humble. And I think of you as one of the big players in that movement and post that movement. And the first question that I had for you, I know I'm like just getting right into it. Thank you for joining me today. It was, how were you influenced by the cinema of transgression? What is that something that you knew about before you? I know you knew about the players before you moved to New York, but I was just interested in hearing more about that.
Well, I lived in Gainesville, Florida, where I was in a band and such, and did a lot of screen prints, did a lot of posters, did a lot of stuff. And I worked in a record store, and they had every new issue of Film Threat magazine, which was a very important, significant magazine that dealt with underground film and independent film, and it really filled a void that I don't think we even realized existed until it filled it. And then we go, wow, we haven't been, no one has been covering this sort of thing. Another magazine I think important at that time was Forced Exposure. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but anyway, both of those were sort of things working in the record store that, you would leaf through it in your idle hours. And so that's where I was introduced to Richard Kern, Nick Zed. I guess those are really the two. But at the same time, working in a record store, I was also, I drove Sonic Youth to the gig in town in Gainesville and took them to dinner at a barbecue joint and stuff. So there was this kind of breathing in this culture. And so Sonic Youth connects to Richard Kern, Lydia Lunch, and so on. So I was already kind of steeped in it as a kind of just an awareness of culture and so on. So when I made my movie Twisted Issues in Gainesville, Florida, that was more influenced, or certainly everything I've just said was part of that mulch that made this thing. But also there's another very important book called Incredibly Strange Films from a San Francisco publisher called Research. And they're also the ones who did Modern Primitives, Industrial Culture. So I'm just trying to paint a picture, I guess, of there was a sort of cultural text, music kind of base for what was going on, I guess, all over the country. Um, but then, so I moved to New York to sort of be in the heart of that. And, I mean, it's an anecdote I've told before, is I don't want to be boring, but there was a great store called See Here, Seehear, that covered zines and music and all that kind of stuff in New York City. And so that was the first place I kind of went in, sort of hat in hand or videotape in hand, and said, "Hey, would you carry Twisted Issues as a consignment thing?" And and Twisted Issues, just as a side note, was in a Ziploc bag, VHS tape, 90-minute cassette tape, and I don't know, 24-page booklet with storyboards from the films and a bunch of my drawings and maybe some script stuff and whatever. So anyway, and within a week or something, you come in and you check, anyone want to buy it? You're just kind of wanting to get your little commission and just, get it out there. And I was happy that the guy behind the counter said, "Hey, Richard Kern saw your movie and really liked it. He thought it was funny, and um, and he wants to trade tapes with you." So that was just what a great thing for another artist to do. Um, so I already felt like I was in a fairy tale of sorts, like, oh, Um, so that's kind of how I got to meet Richard. I came to his apartment, and he had this great apartment with wooden floors, and I swear every transgression movie you've seen of his was shot in that apartment. So I at that point had already seen, maybe I hadn't. I don't even know if I'd seen any of his films. He said, just choose a film, because I brought mine, and I think I took Submit to Me Now, which I considered the more kind of psychedelic one. I think I dropped acid and watched it. I did that a lot with movies that I was interested in, but mind you, on a 12-inch Trinitron, the one that appears in Twisted Issues, that's the TV that I use. So much of my initial entry into all of this was through a kind of, now in the age of cell phones and whatnot, maybe scale isn't, I don't know, but it was just this sort of Um, so yeah, so that was my awareness, and then but then funny, like Nick Zed, um, I I sent him one in the mail. He just wrote me back. I don't know if he sent the movie back, probably not, because that'd cost money. But he sent me a letter that said, "I really hated the movie and I hated the soundtrack music," and uh, and I instantly used that as a post quote for the box and for ads and stuff. And then I met him at some screening where he was screening his stuff, and all his stuff was film and a totally different kind of subject, but shooting in video was this sort of, I am but a poor pretender to art or something, because you guys actually shoot in film. Anyway, and I met him and I told him, I said I used that as a pull quote, and he was kind of, oh, I would have done that too. It was um, there's something about, just if you just keep showing up, people at a certain point in a subculture, whatever, they're gonna, like, well, fuck, this guy's here again, So I think there was a little bit of that. I was kind of persistent, but the real entree into at least the cast, if you're talking about Red Spirit Lake as the sort of cinema transgression cast, was through Annabelle, who I met through Richard, and Richard was her roommate,
Mm.
or he was her roommate. And so yeah, so that's so, but once then I also started working at Screw Magazine, which was this important Al Goldstein. It was very significant free speech kind of conduit. And actually, initially, I started working for Al Goldstein's cable show, which was called Midnight Blue, which was, free. It was on Manhattan Cable back in the days, when before I don't know what, but before streaming, certainly. um You'd have, and channel 49, or whatever, and mostly it was home shopping, but there's all kinds of, actually, but then there'd be the local one channel that was just for local stuff, and that's where there'd be sort of sex ads, Midnight Blue, which was, I think, half hour, an hour, I think, every night. And I could be wrong about that, maybe once a week, but that's where I started with their studio. And I met Annie Sprinkle. There were some really great. You know, so what I'm saying again, I'm just trying to create a picture of like this cultural bed that we all kind of just flowed back and forth. And at Screw, I met David Aaron Clark, who is the giant Jesus in We Await, and was also a novelist long before he moved to LA and became a porn director. He was a respected novelist, Tower Books. His novel, his first novel, not his first novel, but his novel, The Wet Forever, was prominently displayed in their kind of up and coming novelist thing. But he worked at Screw. He also did some very intense performance stuff. I mean, to call it like play is just not even. It was just ritual and blood. And I don't know if you know much about David Clark, but um,
Very like Ron Athey kind of.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, very exactly that. And and he knew Ron, and he was kind of the East Coast. He was doing his own thing. And there's a video somewhere that I showed as part of this thing. I curated a thing called the Happy Gland Review, and it would just be short video pieces. And one of his is called Extreme Unction, Unction, that I hope exists somewhere. I don't even know if I have the VHS anymore in a box somewhere, but one of his ritual performances, and again, a lot of blood, a lot of um, intense, really intense stuff. And he was funny because he would say, he would just say, "Don't call me a masochist," like because he was much he was just it was much more for him an empowerment thing. It wasn't like, "Oh, beat me up" or whatever. It was like, and he would just stand proud, and he's a big fat guy, um, and just like streaming blood from yeah, it was amazing. I mean, really amazing stuff actually. Um, that's a little sidebar, but. Uh, and he kind of really found himself, I think, once he hit San Francisco, because oh my God, like as intense as New York could have been, San Francisco was much more intense, right? I mean, I remember sitting at one of the coffee shops, Muddy Waters or something, not my local coffee shop, but I was meeting friends and stuff, and we're talking. And I was describing a performance he was at last night. Uh, something like stitching through someone's eyebrow or whatever. And I swear to God, there's a lady sitting table, and this is morning coffee type time. She just kind of slides in her chair, slides, not she slides. Like, and I don't remember the circumstances, but it was sort of like I think she just went weak, listen, because he just loudly talking about this description. It's actually the guy who has his dick clamped in We Await. If
Mm-hmm.
you've seen We Await, um, he was the one telling the story. He just has this big his voice could fill a room, and he's just telling us, yeah. And then she started cutting at his eyebrow, and the blood was just, the person faints anyway. One of those moments. But okay, way back. So back to New York. Yeah, so that was the setting, and then when we were looking to cast Red Spirit Lake, something I basically have always done, except for American Mummy, cast my friends and cast people I know, people in our circle, ready-mades, and yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question. It was a rambling response.
No, I mean, you touched on so many things I actually have questions for. But before, I have a question about sadomasochism and the sex industry, because these are things that I'm really interested in and that my listeners are really interested in. So I kind of have that lens on it. But I wanted to talk about, I'm kind of going in chronological order here almost,
Okay.
how I want to talk about The Bitches.
Okay.
So Richard Kearns filmed The Bitches, and this is a film that I watched with my patrons, and we absolutely loved it. People were going wild for it when we watched it. And I wanted to talk a bit about, I read a lot of interviews with you and I watched interviews, and I was surprised that people weren't asking, what was it like to make this film and star in this film?
Right. Well, um, well, for one thing, it was shot in two segments. Um, he shoots very fast, Richard, basically. So the first segment is the first part of the movie, basically, up until where it fades to black, and then comes up, and suddenly I'm wearing a dress and stuff. Um, and the real action starts. Um, but well, what was your question? Sorry,
What was it
this is some
like
of the
to
stuff
make
you
this?
can trim.
Yeah.
Um, Fun. Well,
Yeah.
fun, certainly fun to begin with. Fun to end with. It was just fun. He initially told me that he wanted to make a sequel to King
King
of
of
Sex,
Sex. Yeah.
the King of Sex, and I think that was his intention. And I guess features wise, maybe he felt I looked a little bit like Nick. But artists, you go into something thinking it's going to be one thing, but the art talks back to you. That's what I always say about art. It tends to talk back to you, and unless you've really got something so nailed down, you breathe it in, it breathes back at you, and suddenly it's a little different or whatever. So what I'm saying is, he said that as this is what it's going to be, but doesn't feel like King of Sex to me, for one thing. Doesn't have a Butthole Surfers soundtrack. It has the Jim Thorwald thing, which is great. If I'm correct, I think that's Jim Thorwald. But I mean, he's a funny. For one thing, he's a really funny guy. Um, Rye got a southern accent. Have you ever spoken to him? Did
Mm-mm.
he? No. Um, but like his direction basically would just consist of, we'd kind of get in position and he'd go, okay, folks, think of something to do. He would just start shooting and uh, find something to do, something like that. Find something to do. So, well, whatever, we're doing it. Um, I mean, I love actually the setup, the structure, and possibly my favorite shot is me coming up between the two women. Spot. I think that's just hilarious. Um, but then, so we shot that. I don't know if we'd already shot Red Spirit Lake or, we had to shoot that in pieces. Independent films, you tend to shoot in pieces. They can take months, years. Um, but he screened the bitches, which was just that first arc to the fade out at a screening in Brooklyn, where we showed an Alice Wittenstein film. I don't know if her name has come up in the. Um, I think it was actually that was probably her main feature. It was either Alphaville or Betaville or the one she made after that. But it was a bunch of stuff, and he showed that, and I really think the whole. I think his impression. I can't really remember, but it was just sort of like I don't know, like the kind of people are kind of meh about it,
Mm.
like, and I sort of overheard like a sort of joke. Well, if it's in black and white, it's an art film, as opposed to being porn or something. And because I'm trying to remember, I mean, I think yeah, I am erect in that mood. I mean, it's a real thing, whatever. Anyway, so but then we went and shot Red Spirit Lake, where he gets fisted to death. I don't want any spoilers out there,
Oh
but
no, you can spoil. This is a
for
spoiler
your
heavy
audience, yeah,
podcast.
yeah, yeah. So and again, I don't recall the order of things, but definitely that happened, which was a transgressive moment in narrative filmmaking, inarguably, right? So then he and I were walking from the apartment that he used to live in, but then I moved in, and then he had to move out with Annabelle, and we're walking across town, and we had just the book, another research book called Angry Women,
Mm-hmm.
that had essays by Lydia, a bunch of people, had just come out, and there was a lot of discussion of reversing the gaze and things that now are, I guess, are sort of scholarly tropes. But it's hard to explain how significant it was
Mm-hmm.
to like, oh, and both of us. So I'm not sure if this was before the Red Spirit Lake thing, but we both are just talking about how to wit, we got to get our act together. We can't just be I don't. That sounds too like. Yeah, we're gonna start being more. But it was just more just an awareness that you know, things are moving. It's up to us to keep our legs moving and keep moving. And so after Whisper Lake, after that conversation and whatever order that was, I just get a phone call from Richard saying, I want to shoot another scene as part of that movie, The Bitches. And I do not recall if it was even called The Bitches at that point. Sure. And then, sure enough, a scene that I think certainly equals the Red Spirit Lake scene in terms of just sort of like, whoa, a surprise or whatever for its time. So that's how that happened, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
Well, that's actually something that we were struck by when we were watching it, was how much fun it looked like you guys were having. Like
Yeah.
we were so we just I love that film, and yeah, it just is so joyful.
Oh, that's great. That's
So
great. Like I
you
added the humor at the end, like with the gunshots and stuff. My reactions, which are funny, afterwards, he was like, "Wow, it hadn't occurred to me to for it to be funny." Like I don't know if he was more into making it more degrading or
mhm.
something, or whatever his artist vision. But my thing, which I think is consistent with my work, is more like let's have some yeah, be funny, or if I can.
It is very funny,
Yeah.
and it's also like sexy, and like it's just like it's all the things that I love.
Yay.
Yeah. So you worked as an artist at Screw Magazine, which you said a little bit about, but it was you also worked closely with actors in Red Spirit Lake who were involved in the sex industry in some capacity. And I know that you've been involved in the porn industry in California. So, how has porn and the sex industry influenced your work overall?
Well, um, when I finally started working in porn in LA, 1998, I mean that's when I was actually in the sex industry. Like there's no fooling. These are big, bright, colorful cardboard boxes with VHS tapes inside that are they make thousands of them. Like, oh, okay, I'm definitely in an industry now. Prior to that, I mean, Twisted Issues, for example, there's no nudity in it, which is kind of more a reflection of my own sort of uptightness, certainly at that time. And as a funny side note, when Richard and I met in his apartment, he said, kept waiting for that girl with the long hair to take her shirt off, because that's, and that it just what again working with my friends, it just wasn't that kind of thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we were all friends, and it was a smallish community and thus incestuous certainly, but none of us are exhibitionists in that group. um and then working at Screw, I mean, the joke about Screw was, if you can masturbate to anything in foul black and white printed, good luck, like because it was so kind of it did everything it could to just make it. I mean, Screw basically was the reason why Screw succeeded was because the Village Voice wouldn't take personal ads of a sexual nature.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were some out of towner coming in, you go to the newsstand, you find Screw, you go to the back, and and you'd read the ads, these little tiny ads. So that was what Screw was. That's really what paid the bills of Screw. And then, but because those paid the bills, then great art directors over the years, and who kept a lot of the underground comic artists employed because Screw would hire R. Crumb, Spain, all those kind of as that particularly as underground comics began to wane in their influence and being able to make money from them and stuff. Screw was just this great standard bearer of again free speech, comic art, underground comic art, and mostly sex ads. So again, not porn per se, as in but again, at Midnight Blue, we had Annie. We had I can't even remember some of the names of these like big, and I mean big, but no, just kidding, but big talents in the business. Um, so I was kind of aware of the porn industry as this thing that certainly, and there were reviews. David Aaron Clark would review a bunch of porn, but he was really into porn. Like he used porn. I didn't really use porn. I mean, there'd be a few. Literally, I'd go to the corner video store, rented. They'd want $20 deposit, go home, beat off. Can we speak freely here? And then return and literally be like 90 minutes later, and the guy'd be like, "Really?" Well, I want my $20 back. And it's like, but I mean, that was just, I mean, that was like the purest use of porn. I didn't view it as art. I didn't, it was before the internet, where you could just kind of like, you know. So yeah, and for whatever reasons of, I was kind of like, I don't want to say a snob, but I was just kind of like, I'd rather be with the actual company of women if I could. I just, I don't know. I was, and actually working at Screw made you so aware of, wow, this, you were able to see, and my dear late friend David Clark was a perfect example of someone who really liked porn, but again, he was such a polymath in terms of all his skills and interests and stuff. So fast forward, San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco with Annabelle. Dave Clark still lived in New York, but we loved him, and I kind of encouraged him to move to San Francisco because shit was falling apart for him in New York, and he did. He started working for a magazine called The Spectator, I think, a newspaper, which was sort of like the closest thing the Bay Area came to Screw magazine. It's a version kind of. He had a column, and he started doing fetish stuff, and so videos, and so I would help him with those, like shoot, do some editing. And this would have been after Red Spirit Lake, which again, a lot of naked girls in that, and most of them were strippers. They worked at
Mm-hmm.
this place called Billy's Topless, which is just such a great. If it doesn't occupy a legendary place in New York history, it should. I mean, it certainly does in the hearts of people who went there. But I don't know if people are even aware of Billy's Topless. But it was great. It was on 14th Street. We'd walk from Screw Magazine, which was also on 14th Street, and go there. $2.50 Rolling Rock, and you could just watch women get naked. It was fantastic, and no coverage. There just wasn't. You didn't get this. It was just this like an old-fashioned kind of thing. And Annabelle worked there, and that's actually how I met Richard, or not. That's not true. How I met Annabelle was because Richard would go there to sort of find models. So a lot of his models, certainly in New York girls, were workers, but they worked at Billy's. But I mean, having made American Mummy out here, which has very limited nudity, and it's made in fucking Hollywood and stuff, you just had to negotiate every nipple
Mm-hmm.
basically, and it became anyway. It's a whole nother story. I could talk about American Mummy. I'm not going to. Let's save the fun stuff. So, but the joke for me is, American Mummy, you had to talk people, and you felt like a sleaze. Like, well, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, coming into this though, when you auditioned, I explained that this is what we needed, and then again, I'm not complaining. I don't want to talk badly about anybody, but it's just sort of that all those kind of dynamics change once you're on set because I'm like, what? But on Red Spirit Lake, it was hard to get them to keep their clothes on. That's my joke, and but it was the truth. It's like it was easy to, okay, we're going to do this, and it was certainly helped by the fact that Annabelle, a co-worker, I mean, she essentially co-directed the film. I mean, we co-wrote it. She shot a lot of anything that I'm in and that we're not both in. She probably shot it. Although our friend Lori Lieber also did a lot of shooting there. But anyway, she was one of the witchy figures who circle around the ball guy naked, and um, gifted photographer. That's the thing. So many people in Red Spirit Lake were just had their own thing going, art and so on, art making. Bring me back on course. What is it?
Talking about
What are we
the
talking about?
sex
Oh, porn,
industry and
porn industry.
porn,
Okay,
yeah.
porn, and yes, okay. So in San Francisco, Dave Clark and I started doing these. I say, and they were his projects using talent he knew. Um, he would do this sort of a portrait of a mistress kind of thing. That's not what he'd call them, but like, so mistresses he knew, or he was a slave to. He would do these videos, and I would shoot them. But to illustrate the fact that I really wasn't a porn guy, we'd be shooting something where it'd be a girl thing, but there'd be a dildo, and there'd be insertion, and there'd be um, and a strap on and stuff, and I'd be shooting, and he'd be talk, and he'd say, "Charles, give me the porn shot," and I'm like, and I guess that there's some sort of classic, two V shapes, uh, and but I didn't know that. I'm like, I don't know. Come on, man, you know what a porn shot. And I'm like, I literally didn't. So that just speaks to, like, I know that was a milestone for me of like, oh, I really don't know fuck about porn, because then he would say, no, like, and then he'd show me, he'd lend me tapes, just watch these so you know what a porn shot is. Okay, and then it wasn't until, so we're both living in San Francisco. um, he goes down to LA, sort of like for a week at a time, as a journalist for the Spectator, to cover these porn shoots. He Then he got the shot to do a fetish porn shoot of that's his, but he really wanted me to come down as the camera guy and to edit it. Um, and as a side note, the mistress in this one is the one who basically I came down to shoot the thing, and basically Dave was really good at not really being honest about things. I mean, again, I loved him so much, but this was one of his fatal flaws. He wasn't very honest. So I'm there, and I'm shooting this thing, and it's my own trip that I was like, well, I'm not, but at least I'm not doing porn. That was just kind of in my head. And and then on the same set where we just shot this, you know, it had girl stuff. It had all kinds of stuff, but it wasn't porn per se. And then this guy John Bone, he's not alive anymore, but I believe he invented the world's biggest gangbang. He was more
Mm.
sort of a impresario than he was he was very smooth, and he walks up. So Charles, I hear you're here for another day. Yes. Well, we're doing a little boy-girl scene tomorrow. Probably take 90 minutes, $150 if you shoot it. And it was just like, and it's all cash. And it was just like, and that was my first step in, because for one thing, San Francisco was drying out for me, both emotionally and also just professionally, and anyway. And so then next thing I know, we had both moved to LA, and I started shooting and editing for Dave. And then at some point, I realized, shit, I could be actually directing these things. And a friend of mine, this guy named Eric Brummer, who you might have
Mm-hmm.
know his work. He also goes by Slane Wayne. He did a movie called Debbie Does Damnation.
Mm-hmm.
He did something for Extreme Productions called Tales from the Clit,
That's
and
so
and
good.
that was the first breach of this kind of wall between this sort of film thread underground filmmaking thing and porn.
Mm-hmm.
And because he lived in LA, he's from LA. um I think he told me that he used to do this thing where, and this was way back when, he would just convince girls on Santa Monica or on Melrose to give him a blowjob, and he would shoot them. Like, this is
Like
way before.
gonzo porn, proto gonzo
Yeah,
porn.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Proto. Yeah. So anyway, so he introduced me to a guy named Rob Black, who was this very important, you know, back in at Screw Magazine. David Aaron Clark would write reviews of Rob Black Extreme Productions because they were so transgressive and used punk rock soundtracks and this and that. I mean, stuff to me that, in truth, I found a bit surface-y.
Mm.
Like, okay, because for one thing, it's still porn. But so anyway, so we're here, and he thought of Extreme as like this kind of pinnacle or something, which in retrospect is kind of funny. But he just, I really, but they wouldn't talk to him. They didn't like his stuff. His stuff was a little too arty. I'm to blame for some of that because of my shooting, but it's also under Dave's the director, and he, into Wong Kar-wai, into, he was into really, he was so exacting for a porn director. Like, and just for me, it just got to the point somewhat unbearable as a technician to working with him, and then a bunch of emotional reasons, also, and ultimately pay. That I'm like, I should do this myself. So Eric Brummer, Tales from the Clit, he showed me the box. Look, and I'm like, wow, and you're just kind of thrilled. Yeah, and money, and and again, it's in retrospect such small money, but at the time, and actually even right now, just sort of like, oh. And what I got to do? So I met Rob Black, gave him copies of Red Spirit Lake and We Await, and then he'd already seen them. So when I met him, he was actually this kind of tentative, shaking my hand, um, because he thought I was Barrett from We Await or something, and and unfortunately, once the employee employer dynamic begins, all that goes aside. You're ultimately kind of subjugated to the guy who's paying your bills. But anyway, that was a wonderful brief moment. And basically, he just said, "Look, you can do anything you want. Do movies for us." I said, "Well, I'm not really into porn. Like I've spent most of so much of my life when applying for jobs trying to talk the person out of hiring me. I mean, that's something, regardless of the job. I've always been sort of, well, and so I said, I don't really, you don't need to. I said, we'll give you the cast. I'll tell you who I want in the cast. They're all professionals. They know what to do. You don't really have to do anything. Listen, do whatever kind of fucked up story you want, as long as there are 5 fuck scenes. I hold up 4 fingers. 5 fuck scenes. And you can do whatever you want. So basically, I could get away with like a 20-page script, basically, because blah 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 blah. They start fucking, blah 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 blah. They start fucking. So I made. First, I edited him for a little bit, because they're trying to find a slot for me, um, and they loved all that too. And it was all not it's all linear editing. It was back in the day. You still tape shuttling
Mm-hmm.
back and forth and stuff. Um, but they loved what I did with it. I used effects and stuff that I'm like. And the critique actually was, how do you beat off for this? But Rob didn't care because he was into being this kind of wunderkind producer director, and as a director he had done some things that at the time seemed very important. A movie called Miscreants, Miscreants, is what at the time was just so. But he had broken off from the guy who invented Gonzo, whose name escapes me. Like he was his employee, and that guy, people basically weren't doing Gonzo before he started doing them. And I should have done some research, to remember his name. But so similarly, I was kind of able to do what I want. So the very first movie I made for Rob Black as a director was Archer's Last Day. And Archer's Last Day was literally within, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years from making We Await. So it to me it feels the most organic kind of next step, because I think I was shooting with the same camera. No, that wouldn't be true. It would have been well, it doesn't matter. But the point being, the same techniques though. I'm holding the camera. And then after that, I did one called Cornhole Armageddon, which my friend Jack Sargent, his initial, I basically took his title. His title though was Cornhole Holocaust, because based on Cannibal
Mm-hmm.
Holocaust, that was his joke, which I thought was great. But then immediately that was quashed because for more than a few people said, Charles, do you know how many Jewish distributors there are in the porn industry?
So
You
many.
can't have you can't have
Yeah.
Holocaust in the title. You can't. Okay, but at that point, driving around town, Armageddon, Bruce Willis, Armageddon. It was everywhere. These big posters in the bus stops and stuff, and unbearable actually. So
I
then I said,
yeah.
Cornhole Armageddon. So that's how that happened, and so that was those 2 movies basically. I was okay with this as a job. I mean, because I also shot a bunch. Still, I shot a bunch of movies too that I didn't direct. Edited a hell of a lot of movies I didn't direct. And there is a period of extreme productions where they all look like my movies. I mean, basically, there's a whole acid sex. Trying to think of the various ones, but you just look at them. It's
I gotta see these.
we can hook you up. I definitely would love for you to see Archer's Last Day, because that really is, as I say, and it was the most sort of, well, anyway, and it was a loosely, not based, but loosely sort of inspired by a Philip K. Dick novel called The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. So it's called Archer's Last Day. And basically, it's about this hard hat guy who loses his job, comes home and rapes his wife, is conked on the head by his wife, and then goes into this Book of the Dead thing or whatever, where he goes through these different stages, ending up in hell. Um, anyway, that's a good that one I think holds up. That one I think holds up. And Cornhole Armageddon, for some reason, a lot of people find that the one that they really like too, which is more of a Cronenbergian idea of this like virus that spreads around the world that makes people want to butt fuck. So
Amazing.
that's basically the premise, you know. So so it was okay. The job was okay. Um, and at the time, I was involved in a this is but this is the story. I'm trying. Sorry, this is the story. I feel like well, this is so personal, you know. But I was involved in a long distance relationship that was so important to me that I never partook of any of the things that one would partake of as a director in porn. And believe me, it was offered to me, sexual favors, etc. I just was kind of like, no, I'm, you know, and so I, even being in the porn industry, I kind of had this kind of, it wasn't snobbery, it was just sort of like, well, I, you know, maybe uptightness, and again, seeing Red Spirit Lake, really uptightness? I don't know what to tell you, but I really wasn't. If I had it all to do over again, maybe I would have just like celebrated, you know, the fruits of the job, but it just wasn't, you know, and you know, I'd leave after a shoot and, you know, I just, because I was trying to maintain this thing that I want to make films. I mean, I want to do stuff that actually matters to me. Now, in retrospect, I think everything one does as an artist bears your fingerprints, bears your brushstrokes, you know, bears your at least aesthetic intention. I mean, the limitation of 5 fuck scenes is kind of a limitation, but it's also, you know, it's just like in real movies, you know, you fade out after the sex starts, you know, and this one you stayed with the sex, you know, and but I was becoming disaffected. But I had 2 champions uh, at this the main magazine that covered porn called AVN, Adult Video News, and they're the ones who used to, I don't know if they still do, host this big thing in Vegas with
Oh yeah, it's still going.
yeah, yeah. But these 2 reviewers, Susie, I wish I could remember her name, and Ellen Gee, were the two, and they put me on the map in the porn industry because they love these movies because they said, look, we get to fast forward to the sex to the story through the sex to the story as opposed to the opposite, which arguably is not the kind of porn that a guy wants to watch.
Mm-hmm.
They want to, you know, and so there was a point where, you know, because I would do things. There's a moment in Archer's Last Day where Tom Byron is, who's the star of that one. It's a fuck scene, but he definitely subjugated, slapped this one, you know, like really bad stuff. Like it wasn't like there was no play. It wasn't like a kind of playful. It was. I mean, mind you, she didn't actually get slapped. It was all in the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
but and the cutting and stuff. So in other words, it was a cinematic slap as opposed to like an actual slap. But more to my mind more effective because you know, he just slapped her, you know, but in reality he didn't. I'm just saying. So it was a movie slap, and then he rapes her. But there's a point where, you know, it's all going good and stuff, and then suddenly she turns, everything turns green. There's stuff going backwards like in The Exorcist, and you know, and then she's laughing at him or whatever, and then and then suddenly the green goes away and the strange music goes away, and then we're back in the scene, and I'm thinking, you can beat off to the so in other words, I knew I was doing this. I don't remember saying to myself, I'm going to do this, but I knew what I was doing was subverting the arc of
Mm.
sexual desire. And there was a point I was like, I don't have the best interests of the viewer in mind. I'm not an ally in this.
But this is why queer people love you. Because queer people can beat off to anything.
Wow,
Yeah.
I'm writing that down. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean,
That's funny.
you say that, and I'm thinking to myself, you would be surprised. A lot of people found your movie very sexy when we were watching it, and not just the naked women, but the scenes of violence. People found very erotic. So,
Interesting. Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Well, I'll put that in my bonnet. Um, but because of these two women at AVN who were champions, of my work, I was up for all these awards at the AVN convention, 1998, and I was writing. I had written a screenplay that Rob, my producer, this is going to be our big summer feature, and budget, crew. We're going to get Jamie Gillis. I know Jamie Gillis says he wrote a book called Water Power, or it's a video called Water Power. But he was an important porn actor. We're going to get Jamie Gillis and so I wrote the script called LA 399, which is it's a signpost that says that's how far away LA is, which is basically a sort of drug deal gone bad movie, with a lot of subjugation and cuckolding and stuff, and that was supposed to happen in the summer. Um, but meanwhile, the AVN Awards were coming before that, and I had this image of myself accepting an award from this big crowd, wearing a gold lame
Yes.
tuxedo, and I didn't like it. I was like, "Oh my God!"
It was horrifying to you.
Well, I just knew knew that that's where I could go. I
Hmm.
knew that that's where this was heading, and me sort of like putting my heels down, trying to keep it from happening, but I could just feel it happening. Meanwhile, my porn fan, creator, dear friend David Aaron Clark, who would have loved to be working for Rob, but also would be loved that but this was him and me a lot. He was, you don't appreciate anything. Like he would tell me, like, because I'd say, yeah, tell him the gold lame text, and he goes, what is wrong with you? Like, that sounds great,
It does
like,
sound great
just,
to me.
well, I mean, again, if I had to do it over again, maybe I would, but no, I have to go on my little picaresque thing, and so and so, but I was what's the word, indulged by who I worked for, and because one of the things I said is that I don't want to do gangbangs. I've edited some gangbangs. I've never shot one. I said I'm not. I just don't. I don't find them. Even me, not a porn guy, I just don't find them erotic.
Hmm.